Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar for today. The title is EV Battery Recycling Q&A, Perspectives from Africa. And we will just wait a few minutes to allow people to join. Bonjour tout le monde, bonjour et bienvenue à notre
Hello,
webinaire.
everyone, and welcome to our webinar, the question and answers on EV batteries recycling perspectives from Africa. We are going to be starting in a few minutes' time to enable people to join us. Please do not hesitate to introduce yourself in the chat and also to choose the channel, the language channel of your choice, because there's interpretation today. There is also a panel which will be conducted in English and French. So please do not hesitate to choose the language that you require, your language of choice.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves in the chat while everyone comes in. And also please choose your language for interpretation. The panel is going to be in both French and English. So please click on the interpretation button and select one of the languages from the menu. You can also choose whether or not you want to mute the audio from the original speaker. Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. Let's wait 1 or 2 minutes more so that we have a few more participants before we start the webinar.
A couple of minutes before we start. We will start very shortly, so please to listen in, the panel will be in both languages, French and English. So please choose your interpretation mode. And feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. All right, I think we can start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today titled EV Battery Recycling Questions and Answers, Perspectives from Africa. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à notre webinaire de
Good morning. Very welcome to today's webinar, of which the title is Question Answers from batteries, EV battery recycling and perspectives from Africa. As you can notice, I will be speaking in 2 languages because the panel, the webinar, in fact, will be conducted in 2 languages. So please do choose your language of choice. Perhaps I will speak a bit of English.
And I am the GAIA Africa Movement Building Manager, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation, and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us your name and where you're joining from. And so in this moment of innovation on transportation electrification, the promise of EV battery recycling to reduce primary mineral demand needs to be examined through a critical lens, removing those rose-colored glasses. So GAIA's publication on questions and answers on EV battery recycling addresses the challenges of current recycling technologies and proposes environmental justice criteria to support solutions for a more circular system. Today, we will learn about topics such as pyrometallurgy, hydrometallurgy, direct recycling, and GAIA's recommendations for a more just and less toxic path forward. Following that, we will be hearing from our partners on the African continent about their perspectives on the matter, what they found interesting, useful for their work, and what can be expanded upon. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to a rich and reflective conversation. Next slide, please. So before we proceed with our panel, I'd like to ground our discussion with a simple explainer of what constitutes an EV battery. So the electric vehicle battery, also called a traction battery, is a rechargeable energy storage device that supplies power for electric mobility from passenger vehicles, so cars, to buses, two-wheelers, or even small utility vehicles. So motorcycles, budgies, depending on where you are in the continent, they're called different things, tricycles, and so on. So most electric vehicles today rely on lithium-ion batteries, preferred for their high power to weight ratio, impressive energy efficiency, and minimal self-discharge. So as you can see in the picture, an EV battery is made of thousands of lithium-ion cells. The lithium-ion cells are the most fundamental element of the battery, responsible for producing the electric current needed to power the vehicle. Approximately 12 or more cells are grouped together, covered by polyethylene foam, and enclosed in an aluminum alloy or steel casing to form a module. Then dozens of modules are encased in plastic or metal to form a battery pack. Then the battery packs are then configured into what we call a battery management system and a temperature control device to complete the EV battery. So you can see on the visual all the different components. And then each lithium-ion cell is made up of four major components. There's a cathode, which is the positive electrode with high-value minerals. And these high-value minerals are, can be lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese. There's electrolyte, which is made of electrolytes are made of lithium salts, and separator, which is a polymer-based membrane, and an anode negative electrode, usually mostly made of graphite. So a lithium-ion battery generates electricity through chemical reactions of lithium, which is inserted into the cathode. EV batteries are typically retired when when their capacity is about 70 to 80% of their original state, or experience hardware failures after operating in a vehicle for approximately 10 to 20 years. So what happens to those batteries once they've reached their 70 to 80% capacity and they get retired from cars? Now that we have established a common understanding of what a EV battery is, I would actually like to, and before we move on to our panel, I would actually like to ask everyone if you could turn on your cameras and maybe we could do a group photo for this webinar. Um, and thank you for coming, everyone. It's nice to see all your beautiful faces. Carissa, you can let me know.
One more.
All right. Thank you, everyone. All right, I think we're good to go. So thank you, everyone. We will now move on to our presentation segment, and we will begin with the Lean de Brucker and Lean de Brucker, or I'm not sure how, if which accent to pick up here. Um, Lean is from Gaia Global team. Um, she's the global EV waste strategist and advocate. Lean coordinates and ensures cross-regional research alignment and strategy definition on electric vehicle battery waste and supports also donor engagement. So previously, Lean has also worked with private foundations, including the 11th Hour Project and Sage Fund, as well as international human rights organizations to facilitate coalition building and campaign strategy on corporate accountability of mining companies and natural resource government with a focus on Francophone Africa. Welcome, Lean. Thank you for coming, and I will now pass the floor on to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm here to share key findings of GAIA's analysis of EV battery recycling, and especially what it means for GAIA members and local communities in Africa, which, as we all know, includes key mineral producing countries and some emerging lithium-ion battery manufacturing and recycling in a few places. First, let me clarify that GAIA's starting point is not recycling, it's justice. Who benefits, who bears the risks, and who gets left holding the waste. So, next slide. Why do we look at battery waste? The toxic legacy of poorly managed battery recycling, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with the history of lead-acid battery recycling, is well known. So we could advance to the slide that says why battery waste. And e-waste follows the familiar pattern of waste colonialism. It's difficult to repair, and recycle items produced in the North are sent to lower income countries who do not have the infrastructure or the resources to manage it, and this all too often burdens the informal sector with this toxic waste. 60% or higher of lithium-ion battery demand is for personal vehicles, electric vehicles, and this audience here on the webinar is at the center of that story for that demand. As mineral producers, as countries burdened by e-waste, and as communities who deserve clean, affordable energy. So next slide. Today, we are making far more batteries than needed. The level of overproduction and overcapacity is astonishing. China alone is on track to produce 5 times global lithium-ion battery demand. Europe and the US, twice as much. This overproduction is driven by market economics, by state subsidies, and by geopolitics, not necessarily by true climate need. And communities and workers are paying the price for this myth of the demand, as shown in the overproduction. Next slide. Recycling alone is not enough, and much of what is called recycling today is actually burning, which destroys materials permanently and generates toxic emissions, and is not a true recovery of materials. And so GAIA has developed this zero waste hierarchy, setting our environmental justice agenda on battery materials. And you'll see that recycling sits fairly low on the hierarchy, and we prioritize other solution pathways higher on the hierarchy, which first and foremost is to incentivize repurposing before premature recycling. Because as Kenta said, batteries removed at 80% capacity can still serve as stationary storage for 10 or more years. A second key priority is to reduce toxic materials in battery supply chains. And third, of course, is to prevent waste colonialism. So now with that context setting, we'll turn to the next slide, and I'll cover what is EV battery recycling, the environmental justice criteria we use to assess it, and then our recommendations. So next slide. Next slide. Electrifying transport is essential for reducing emissions, but battery manufacturing is already exceeding demand, and recycling is held out as the fix for the mineral demand to meet the mineral demand that overproduction itself has created. So next slide. what is the recycling process? Lithium-ion battery recycling is a rapidly changing field. Most recycling activities today, next slide, are concentrated in China, with emerging industries in Europe and the US, and a few facilities being built on the continent in Nigeria and South Africa. But everywhere, the data available is thin. Batteries are removed from vehicles when capacity drops to about 80%, but no reliable data exists yet on what happens to those post-consumer EV batteries because most of the batteries are still in the vehicle. And most of what is actually recycled today is manufacturing scrap, which is a very homogeneous material, quite different from the batteries that come out at the end of, after having been used in a vehicle for 10 plus years. So next slide. Yes, thank you. So current proposed recycling pathways involve three broad steps. First, there is pre-treatment, then metal extraction, and then end product preparation. Under pre-treatment, this is when you have crushing and thermal treatment and other processes to generate what is often referred to as black mass. Then that black mass can be further treated in the next second step of metal extraction through what is often referred to as hydrometallurgy involving acid leaching. There's another major pathway, pyrometallurgy, that you've perhaps heard of. Pyrometallurgy is effectively very similar to smelting. So there again, you have a process that is exceptionally energy intensive and produces significant greenhouse gases and destroys far more material than it recovers at the end. Pyrometallurgy is most often used to recover cobalt and nickel. Cobalt and nickel have a high enough value and the properties lend themselves to that process, whereas lower value, lower cost minerals like lithium and manganese and graphite can typically be destroyed in the pyrometallurgy, in the burning pathway. So in a nutshell, the process runs from mechanical shredding to then acid leaching or burning to metal separation. And each of these steps generates hazardous byproducts and requires significant energy and chemical inputs. Similarly, they take place on different continents. So most of steps 1 and 2 could perhaps take place and do take place in European recycling facilities, in American recycling facilities, but by and large, the 3 steps as a whole are only possible in certain countries in the Asia-Pacific region and primarily in China. Most of step 3, end product preparation, is only possible today in China, given the advanced level of battery technology that is available there compared to other countries and regions of the world that are catching up. So that's an important nuance for us as well. Next slide, please. So next, for GAIA, recycling is appropriate only once all other uses of the material are exhausted, and an effective process has to safely convert all materials, not just the high-value metals, to a reusable form without intensive hazardous chemicals or high-heat smelting. This means then, next slide, we assess recycling through 5 lenses: material recovery and energy use. What's recovered, actually, and how much energy is used, the air, water, and toxicity hazards, the level of manufacturer responsibility, the benefit sharing for workers and communities, and then the safeguards against waste trade. Next slide. Here we ask, what is the full carbon footprint from collection to recycled output? What happens to all materials, including the plastics and the casings, and not just the cobalt and nickel? On toxicity, recycling facilities have released PFAS and heavy metals into air and water, harming frontline communities. And this is not hypothetical. This has happened already in the United States and in South Korea, from the little available data that is publicly available. Next slide. Who pays under manufacturer responsibility? We ask, who's paying for the end of life? Extended producer responsibility, EPR, has to cover the full chain, including lower value materials. For benefit sharing, the recycling boom cannot bypass the workers and communities already bearing the costs. And African countries that are the mineral producing countries, especially, and all Africa should not become the destination for this waste at its end of life. And then on waste trade, we call for strong safeguards on exports of spent batteries, of used cars, of spent batteries, and of black mass. And all of this is essential to prevent waste colonialism. So what are some of the barriers to scaling up the technologies? Because most of the recycling technologies, save for some facilities in China, are still maturing. These are not necessarily proven at commercial scale. Next slide. The economic barriers. It's still cheaper, often, depending on market conditions, to mine new lithium, graphite, and manganese than it is to recycle it. So the economics isn't there in favor of recycling. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, LFP batteries, which are slowly becoming the dominant electric vehicle battery chemistry and are certainly the dominant energy storage chemistry. They have no high cobalt or nickel that would make the recycling economically viable. And so it's not viable without certain subsidies paid. As I mentioned then, another barrier is the variability of the feedstock. Batteries that have been retired from vehicles come from dozens of manufacturers with different chemistries and designs. And there is today insufficient standardized labeling, and sorting is really difficult. And that is an exceptional challenge for recyclers. And then the sensitivity to impurities, the acid leaching, the hydrometallurgy pathway in particular, is very sensitive to impurities, and a contaminated feedstock degrades the recycling efficiency. Next slide, other challenges, fires. Battery fires at recycling facilities and battery storage facilities have released toxic smoke in China, France, Hungary, the UK, and the US, with at least one death and multiple evacuations. Informal workers, especially, are disproportionately exposed to battery waste hazards. This is a pattern familiar, right, from other materials and e-waste contexts. And then collection and transportation can account for up to 40% of the recycling costs, and this is a major barrier in regions with dispersed populations or poor infrastructure. So finally, we turn back to this question of, will recycling reduce primary mining? Next slide. For recycling to reduce primary mining, it has to produce battery-grade material that can compete at a cost-effective manner with freshly mined minerals. And that has not yet been demonstrated. So credible data, most of which is not yet publicly available, is needed to verify industry's claims of, for instance, we recover 95% of lithium. And so GAIA calls for mandatory disclosure of that data. And we just want to gently remind and ensure that it is incorrect to simply assume that recycled material will automatically displace primary extraction. Without cost competitiveness and high recovery rates of all the materials, we risk building recycling infrastructure that fails to deliver, just as we can say plastics recycling has. So what are the recommendations that GAIA is making? Next slide. Number one is that smelting and incineration are excluded from the legal definition of recycling. That's not recycling, that's burning. Second, we call and require manufacturers and automakers to disclose the battery data, the chemical composition, the state of health, the history of use, and to ensure that that data is free from proprietary logs. Mandatory extended producer responsibility that penalizes toxicity and planned obsolescence of products, and that rewards repurposability and safe design. And then scaling up regulation and funding for electric vehicle battery repurposing for a second life as stationary storage. And this is an opportunity for communities everywhere seeking affordable energy access. I've said a lot in a I'm going to wrap up, and if I could leave you with just two key takeaways. Number one is, as Kenza said at the beginning, we're calling on everybody to remove the rose-colored glasses about recycling, to push for the data. The plastics industry had promised that recycling would solve everything, and it hasn't, and battery recycling must be held to a higher standard. Next, a second key takeaway on the next slide, please, is that recycling is near the bottom of the hierarchy. We have to, number one, avoid overproduction, reduce material footprints, incentivize reuse and repurposing, and all of that will do more to reduce mineral demand and protect communities than recycling alone. And repurposed batteries in particular, as secondary for stationary storage, are a real opportunity for energy access in many communities. And this is where this is an affirmative vision that we have for a positive solution. But there are many barriers to repurposing. If we look, for instance, at some of the policy barriers that European policy, for instance, and in India and in other countries, the policies that regulate battery waste, they incentivize recycling over repurposing, and that is a barrier that needs to be addressed. And there's also economic barriers. In order to repurpose, and next slide, please, we call for access to battery data. There are design constraints that prevent repurposing and fire safety concerns. So thank you so much. I look forward to the respondents' perspectives and to your questions.
Thank you so much, Lee, and thank you for this extensive presentation. I checked some notes, and what I recall is also, so zero waste hierarchy, the recycling is on the lower end of the hierarchy, like you said. Recycling isn't necessarily a fix for mineral exploitation, and it hasn't yet demonstrated that it can reduce primary mining. There are about 5 environmental justice lenses to assess EV battery recycling, and those include recovery of materials and energy intensity, air, water, and toxicity hazards, manufacturer responsibility, benefit sharing, and also waste trade, which is a big one for us on the continent. And so with that, I will also move on to get our responses from our African partners. And I am sorry, I missed a slide earlier where I did not present everyone, but I will do as we go on. So, nous allons maintenant passer à notre deuxième intervenant.
So we are going to now move on to the second speaker, Emmanuel Umpula Nkumba. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly.
Everyone who has joined to get on to English channel, because we will be, our next speaker will be speaking in French. And as I said earlier, we will be doing a dual bilingual webinar today. Donc, Monsieur Emmanuel Umpula Nkumba est le directeur.
Mr. Emmanuel Nkumba is the Executive Director of AFREWATCH and AFREWATCH International. He specializes in business and human rights, as well as extractive sector governance in the DRC and Africa. Mr. Umpula is a board member of Rights and Accountability in Development, Resource Matters, the African Coalition for Corporate Accountability, the Nova Business and Human Rights Center, as well as Inclusive Development International. He previously served as Executive Director of Action Against Impunity for Human Rights, coordinator of the platform of civil society organizations active in the mining sector of Katanga, and advocacy coordinator for the Carter Center.
The Carter Center.
Carter Center. Hello, Emmanuel, and thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. And we look forward to listen to your presentation and your reaction to our publication. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to GAIA for inviting me to this webinar. And I would like to now start my presentation.
So I represent a few organizations, but I won't get back on that. But I would like to add the fact that we have the African Coalition for Natural Resources, which is the African Coalition on Green Minerals. And this is a coalition that comes from 16 African countries who have strategic minerals, including all the minerals that are in demand for building batteries and also the transition minerals. I would like to also thank everyone for this very good report, and especially that it provides some recommendations. So I think that my intervention here will comment on some issues raised in the report. I also note that I am from the DRC, which is a country that produces cobalt, and lithium will also be extracted soon in Manono. And so the DRC provides more than 70% of the cobalt found in the market worldwide. So this represents a considerable contribution in practice. However, we can see that despite this production, the country itself doesn't get any profit or benefits from these minerals, because you will understand that it is not at the level of the mine that we make money. It's rather at the higher level of the value chain, where now the companies make more profits, and including those who produce these batteries. And Lynn has just presented the work that is very important, because we are trying to see through this work the end of life of a battery. So that means that then we can think about the stage of the mine in that regard. So I think that Lynn showed the negative impacts that are related to the production of minerals from the stage of the extraction. We use either pyrometallurgy or other procedures, whether it's hydro, etc., to extract minerals. And this requires the use of acids. And so we have published several reports that show that indeed the extraction of these minerals brings considerable challenges in the countries of the South, whether it's in Zambia, Madagascar, DRC, whether it's in Guinea, everywhere, in fact, there are some negative impacts linked to that extraction. And so this report shows the link. So it shows what happens at the level of the mine and what happens when we have a battery that was produced and when it arrives at the end of its life cycle. What do we do with this battery? So there are several challenges, whether it's for the countries of the South or the countries of the North. Myself, I have already listened to different presentations, and when they say that we need to recycle and we need to reduce the demand of mining from the countries of the South, well, even though that they don't are profitable in that regard, you will see that these are countries that depend on this mining activity. So as a country, if you reduce the mining activities, well, the question is, what's next? Where will that country find its revenue? where will it stimulate its economy? So there's different realities here. There's the economic needs of the country and the environment issues. So this brings us back to how to diversify our economies and how can we make sure that the minerals that are currently extracted be more profitable and allow the countries where these are extracted diversify their economy, and how can we then reduce dependency? And so this brings us to the issue of the benefit sharing. And our coalition, our organization, in fact, puts that at the center of its advocacy. How in the value chain of the extraction of minerals, well, how can we share the benefits and how can we enable this diversification? We also know that the end of life of a battery is not only when it comes to battery. In fact, we saw even in other fields, when an object that was produced arrives at the end of its life cycle, well, often Africa becomes the waste dump, really. And so it's the same with these minerals. So at the end of the day, these minerals come back to Africa. And I can tell you, I think that the real worry should be at the African level. I'm going to give an example. How about the cars? So when you look at the cars that are not used anymore in some countries, well, they are brought to Africa in our landfills. And I think that it is the same with these batteries. So once Europe or once the Western world will see that these cars have reached the end of their life cycle, when there's only 10% left, for example, well, they will send them to countries where the regulations are weak, and so they send really their waste to our countries. And then we will really be in a predicament when it comes to processing of these waste. And so we receive these old cars, and the problem is that we are dealing with very toxic batteries. We are talking about toxicity levels that are very high, and our countries do not have the required technology to process these, but also in terms of financial resources. So we don't have the resources to neutralize this toxicity. We do not have the technology to recycle either. And as an example, today, well, I see another challenge. So here I'm not talking about politicians, but I'm talking about the citizens. We have citizens who live around these sites where minerals are extracted, and we see these citizens who, for example, cannot afford even to buy these cars. When you come to the DRC, you'll see there's not even a single, in fact, electric car. And so I will stop here. But what I can say is that the report from GAIA opens really an opportunity for collaboration so that we can see how to better anticipate then collaboration and how can we amplify our advocacy work, and how can we avoid another catastrophe, which could be in fact the catastrophe of the century, because we're talking here about all the waste coming to Africa, and where we do not have the capacity for recycling, and where people do not even use these electric vehicles. So I will stop here to allow the people to also speak. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So I can note here that the DRC, as you mentioned, produces more than 70% of the cobalt in the world trade market, and they do not, in fact, have any benefit that comes back to the country. And you also speak about the negative impact of these batteries, whether it's at the level of the exploitation and even at the end of the life cycle of these batteries. You also mentioned the fact that Africa also becomes really a landfill, and at the end of life of these vehicles, they end up here. And so based on some statistics that we see in terms of imported electric vehicle, we can think that by 2050 we could have 3 million electric vehicles that would be imported from the United States, Europe, and Japan. And these would be important in our countries, on our continent. We're talking about countries who do not have the infrastructure to recycle them, to recharge them. We're talking about batteries who are not, in fact, built to be recycled. So these are all notes that I made from your presentation. And so now I will switch to English once again.
To our next speaker, and Carissa, if you could please share the slides. And today we have with us Yegeshni Moodley, and Yegeshni is the Senior Campaigner for Climate and Energy Justice at GroundWork, a member of GAIA, Friends of the Earth, South Africa, and actually a founding member of GAIA. And Yegeshni's core work involves campaigning for energy democracy, mobilizing communities to demand clean energy and resist fossil fuel expansion, bringing communities to exchange knowledge and build solidarity for climate justice forms part of the campaign. So the campaign also involves litigation for climate justice. And then previously, Yegeshni was an air quality specialist consultant where she drafted the national framework for air quality management in South Africa. And these are two national priorities, priority areas, air quality management plans, several provincial and municipal air quality management plans, and engage extensively in work on climate science and greenhouse gases or greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, I'll leave you with this and then I'll pass it on to you, Yegeshni. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenza, for the opportunity, and welcome to all the members of GAIA and others that have joined us today. I've titled my presentation EV Battery Waste, Closing the Loop, really trying to understand how do we begin to implement the ideas of circular economy and the principles on this very pressing issue related to our transition to clean energy. Next slide, please. So really the question of battery waste resulting from the use of electric vehicles was introduced to us through the pioneering work that Kenza did in GAIA, and she really opened up our eyes to the possibilities. We first heard from her during the Africa Renewable Energy Exchange in 2024. She presented this as her preliminary research around how GAIA was intending to propose handling the responsible care of EV battery waste. And this was done in a webinar format, but also in person in South Africa, where we visited fence-line communities that were working together towards renewable energy in a community-owned setting. And then we also see a lot of value in it through our conversations in the critical minerals value chain, where we regard GAIA's work right now as groundbreaking in helping to reduce the impact of mining for these minerals that are necessary in order to power the energy transition. By reintroducing these low-load batteries and minerals back into the value chain, we see direct benefits as the opportunity for mining-affected communities. Next slide, please. And in terms of where we would like to see the work going forward, we believe that there's an excellent opportunity around advocacy, as our previous speaker, Emmanuel, has alluded to, that we need to campaign to popularize this movement and to raise awareness of the possibilities that exist within the EV waste industry. But definitely coupled together with producer responsibility. The responsibility for care that is a result of the production cycle must be embedded with the producer and not with the communities or others that are now being added on to this cycle. What we would also like to see are second life initiatives. So really piloting successful ways to utilize used batteries while still keeping the producer responsibility intact. So that was part of what Lynn discussed at the beginning, saying that we cannot now reduce the producer responsibility because we're moving on to a second use. We've got to maintain that sense of ownership and liability while allowing others to utilize this waste stream as an input into a second initiative. And I really believe the core of the work and the direction that could come out of the campaigning is the work around collaboration, uniting the narratives of mining affected communities with those that are impacted by waste and dumping. two separate communities that exist on the continent, that could be unified in the request, in the campaigning, and the move towards the reuse of batteries in our community ownership settings. Thank you so much, Kenza.
Thank you, Igeshni. Thank you for presenting us with your point of view. I really want to emphasize the reuse and repair of batteries, but while keeping EPR. This year in Gaia Africa, we will be looking at what are the examples on the continent of reuse and repair with different partners. This is something that will be coming in the next few months. So we are looking to see at what is happening on the ground in different countries in Africa. What are people doing with maybe EV batteries that have been imported on the continent, or maybe EV batteries from two-wheelers, three-wheelers? Are we using them to charge phones after what happens? So this is some research that we're going into. Thank you, Negeshni. And then I will switch again to French. Et nous allons maintenant passer à notre quatrième.
So right now we will be listening to our fourth speaker, Amadou Ba, who's the founder and executive director of Action Minds Guinea. And so Action Minds Guinea is a civil society organization committed to promoting good governance in the extractive sector. Amadou works towards transparent and responsible management of natural resources, with a particular attention to the rights of local communities affected by mining activities. He has extensive experience in analyzing local dynamics, facilitating multi-stakeholder dialogue, and advocating on issues related to extractive industries. Through his work, he actively contributes to discussions on transparency, accountability, and inclusive development in Guinea. So good afternoon, Amadou. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and so we look forward to listening to your intervention. I'm now giving you the floor. So thank you very much, Kenza. And thank you for inviting me to speak about this very relevant issue for us. And so this is a good way to actually address this issue already to prevent some future problems. And so by 2050, we know that electrical vehicle will be abundant. We know that there will be an even increased production of these batteries and these vehicles. And so this then involves a high level of consumption of primary materials and minerals, especially us in Guinea. We are rich in bauxite, and we then have the 2/3 of the bauxite reserves in the world. We also have the rare earth, which comes in the building of these, and we also have graphite. So I think that this report is particularly relevant because this report addresses some issues that are, yes, problematic, and that will be coming back in the future in terms of the environmental impact, the management of these impacts, the management of the resources that are involved in the construction of these batteries, and also the issue of the recycling. So I think that this report allows me, as a civil society then actor, well, it helps me to better understand the issues that are linked to this process, especially the end of the life cycle of these batteries, because our countries, our states are not at that level of reflection yet. And this is why, as civil society organizations, we need to think about these so that some standards can be developed. And we want indeed for responsibility to be upheld so that we have more transparency when it comes to managing the life cycle of batteries, because we know that there are many challenges when it comes to governance in our countries, especially in the countries of the South. So I think that this is a relevant report, and I think that the document also speaks to the technical limitation of recycling. which is a difficulty when it comes especially to the implementation of a circular economy. Because if we want to have a circular economy, we need to consider all the elements within the value chain and think about which actors plays what role, and this must be done in a transparent manner. So because we are also speaking about having a critical view of the content, well, I think that we need to also consider the involvement, in fact, of the mineral producing countries. So we could maybe further develop the implications of mineral producing countries. As Emmanuel said, we have then some international discussions. We need to enter these discussions. And so we need to also think about international standards that would manage then these batteries. And we need to also ensure that the enterprise be held accountable. And so we need to also manage the damages. We also need to propose some concrete solutions to support the countries. We need to make sure that we have standards and good practices when it comes to managing the waste. So as Emmanuel said, we do not have the technology required to manage these waste. And so we need to make sure that our populations, our communities are not impacted, and also the issue of environmental impact. We know that Africa has become already a landfill for electronic waste, for used vehicles, and so we know that this is a real problem. So how should we address this issue? I think that this is at a good time that we address these issues, because Africa has not yet started using or purchasing these electric vehicles, even though it's the continent that provides the primary resources and minerals that come into the construction of these batteries and vehicles. And so I think that this is a good time to develop a campaign. And so we can also work in collaboration between the African organization, the countries of the South, and the countries of the North, and start to already do advocacy, to also remind everyone of their responsibilities and make sure that some activities are already in place so that we can also strengthen our then collaboration and avoid this catastrophe if nothing is done. And so that is why I really congratulate everyone for this report, and especially the different ideas that are developed in the report and the recommendations which are formulated. These recommendations are strategic as well. And so we need to make sure that we have a structured campaign. We need to have a bottom-up campaign that can then address the head of states who are supposed to do these public policies that would protect the environment and the population, and also to have some standards that could be imposed on the companies and the industries that build these EV batteries, and who should be responsible of its management throughout its life cycle. So I would like to say that from now on, we need to start building something that is sustainable and that would then reach all the relevant actors in the life cycle of the batteries. And so then we wouldn't be surprised with what comes ahead when it comes to EV batteries. Thank you, Amadou. Thank you, Amadou, for your comment. I will most definitely focus on your suggestions for improvement, and that could also be some opportunities for collaboration between the different organizations. Yes, there's a lot of advocacy, but we could also develop the implications for the then countries who produce these minerals. We could also work on the issue of critical minerals, and we could also then focus on the socio-economic impact on the workers and their health as well, especially those who are then involved in the recuperation and management of these waste. So I see that there are questions in the chat. I see that we also have run out of time. I see, Lynn, you have answered to quite a few questions. I don't know, Lynn, if you would like to take the floor. Maybe you want to comment. You can speak in French or in English. And so
go ahead if you'd like to respond.
Yes, thank you so much. I love the questions in the chat, and I'm so grateful to Emmanuel and Yegeshni and Amadou for your incredibly important perspectives. I think to sum up briefly, yes, absolutely, we need batteries for the energy transition to move away from fossil fuels, and we want, like we must move away from fossil fuels. Our question is how can we look at the full life cycle of batteries to avoid perpetuating the same injustices that we've seen for other materials. And, I think there's number one is that addressing battery overproduction is likely the biggest lever to reduce extractive pressure. There are many reports available demonstrating the demand for minerals in order to make the electric vehicles on the premise that we're replacing on a one-to-one basis in high-income countries especially an internal combustion engine four-person vehicle with an electric vehicle. And those demand projections are high. If you remember the first slide I presented, it shows that mineral demand right now, battery production, especially in China, is 5 times higher than what the world needs. And so it's not just about looking at mineral demand and, for instance, in high-income countries, especially reducing the number of large batteries for four-person vehicles, right? That alone is not enough. We have the typical corporate strategies and state subsidies and geopolitics and mineral security that are driving a level of overproduction that is truly responsible for much of the extractive pressure beyond what any plausible mineral demand scenario can ever justify. So I think that's an important part. So yes, addressing overproduction, reducing the number of batteries, especially for four-person passenger vehicles in high-income countries, and then better battery design, eco-design, smaller batteries, more durable, repairable, fit for repurposing, and improved recyclability. If we look at the mineral demand, the minerals that are used in a large truck. I live in the United States, right? People love driving pickup trucks. If you look at the minerals needed for a large pickup truck, that is exponentially higher than the minerals needed for a 2 or 3-wheeler or for a smaller four-person vehicle. So there, right? Better battery design, eco design, smaller, more durable, repairable, etc. And then another important one is that when we're looking at this, we cannot ignore the waste trade issues. We need strong safeguards. And Piotr mentioned a few aspects about Basel. Yes, and absolutely we're seeing illegal, right? Waste electronic equipment and consumer electronics being dumped on the continent. And we need stronger yes, okay, if a used EV comes in, if a used electric vehicle comes in, we don't, the continent needs to have, the countries need to have certain systems in place to be able to assess, is this junk that's coming in, or is this actually still a viable battery? Is it a type of battery that in order to disassemble it, you have to destroy the whole thing? There's those models too. And so I think there's a lot there connected in between waste trade and battery design. So that, I hope, is in a nutshell a little bit of an answer to the many awesome questions in the chat.
Thank you, Lean. Thank you. I would also like to address Faustin's question. Faustin asked if electric batteries or electric vehicle batteries are a false solution. And as you mentioned, no, we need to move away from fossil fuels. But I think our whole point is, how do we move away from fossil fuels and an extractive economy to a one that is not as extractive, or one where we close the loop? We are coming to an end. I know there is a question from Farima about what can we do on a personal level, and unfortunately we do not have enough time for to answer your question, Farima, or any other one that arises. I think I would like to possibly stop here because we are on time and our panelists have other things to get to. I want to thank everyone so much for coming. Merci beaucoup. Merci de nous avoir accordé votre temps, accordé vos idées.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your ideas.
Je sais plus. Je tiens juste à vous rappeler que je vais bien sûr.
So I would like to remind you that we will be sending the recordings of these webinars. We will also send you the presentations. You can also visit our website. You will see that we have different publications, the reports, studies, so everything is in both languages. I think that some of these are currently being translated. In fact, we have the material available in 3 languages, French, Spanish, and English. And so thank you, Lynn Yegishni, thank you, Amadou, and thank you, Emmanuel. And also thank you to the technical team that was here with us today. And we will then continue exploring some potential collaborations. And so I thank you all, and I wish you a good day, afternoon, evening.
The Philippines and from other regions. And thank you for presenting our and listening to our perspectives from the continent. Merci.